I want to begin this segment with a clip from Fox News' The Five, a place we check in on rather often because of our favorite liberal Fox host, Jessica Tarlov. And here she had a chance to dismantle one of the favorite, most often referenced talking points in right-wing media and among Republicans. And in this case, actually, the reason why this came up on The Five is because of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is running for president, of course, right now as an independent. And I want to play this clip for you, but then after it, stick around for a discussion about RFK Jr. and some recent interviews he had that went so bad for him. You rarely see it in politics, pretty brutal, and a few different things on him. But he brought up the idea that the New York Times is, and this is the statement he used, an instrument of the Democratic Party. And Jessica Tarlov got to make a point that we need to be making more often, which is essentially wrong. Here it is.
Accusations about the New York Times, though, are completely unfounded. And we've talked about this a few times before. Democrats do not think that the New York Times is on our side and can point to a number of stories going back to the Hillary Clinton server story, Uranium One. If you even look at the polling and how they cover it, the New York Times Siena poll, for instance, we did a whole 2 days, right, of cycle on the New York Times Siena poll showing.
Really quickly, going to pause your viewing of this segment to ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's so helpful to grow the show. Just make sure that subscribe button is clicked and click the like button as well. Back to the video.
That Trump was doing so much better with Black Americans, with Gen Z voters, that he was somehow within, I think it was a couple points with female voters. And then the breathless coverage of how Biden is too old for this. The Ezra Klein piece came out. That Ezra Klein is at the New York Times. That essay turned into multiple news cycles about Democrats are coming around. They understand that Joe Biden can't do this. That's all our, quote, beloved New York Times. And I'm sorry for RFK Jr. that he doesn't know that there's tape of him talking about being anti-vaccine, talking about policies that are completely out of step with the Democratic Party, to the point that his own family wants to do St. Patrick's Day at the White House and doesn't want to be around him. And they're only going to be upping their campaign against him. And not because we're in a cult, but because he doesn't represent our values.
Right. And by the way, RFK Jr., who's just so ridiculous, he said that about the New York Times being an instrument of the Democratic Party because in the New York Times interview with him, the interviewer dared to press him on how he could be a spoiler in this election, meaning he could end up helping Trump win if he takes more votes from Joe Biden. And that's just a good question, and he should be pressed on that. But now, from his perspective, the New York Times is an instrument of the Democratic Party because they see obvious electoral realities and ask about them. Oh my goodness. But before getting to these interview moments and some other things on RFK Jr., again, brutal, I do want to spend a little bit of time on this idea that is peddled so often in right-wing media, which is that the New York Times, CNN, etc., your sort of mainstream outlets that are non-right-wing, people will call them liberal mainstream media, that they are working on behalf of, that are too biased in a liberal direction, and that their interest is in helping the Democratic Party. It is absurd how that very allegation has caused a situation where that's anything but true. And what I mean is, the journalists at the New York Times, for example, they do care a lot about doing good journalism. And so when they're accused of just being the Fox News of the left or whatever, just being super in the Democratic Party's pockets or being hacks, then often they'll over adjust to really prove that's not what they're doing. And then they're biased, but in the other direction without even really thinking about it in that way. And we talked about this with Don Lemon during my recent interview with him. And he said, yeah, the mainstream outlets like CNN do get really impacted by being accused by networks like Fox News of being too liberal and thus overcompensate. And so instead of just doing coverage that's fact-based, that's accurate, and ignoring the allegations of bias from whoever's lobbing them at you, there is this effort to appear neutral on everything, not necessarily objective, to seem like you're splitting the difference or doing some bad stories here, but that means we need to throw in some bad stories here. Is there justification to do more bad stories here? I don't know, but that'll appear better. And we do see this with the Biden age conversation, because It is a factor, but the emphasis being put on it is not proportional to the importance of it compared to all the other things taking place. And that is a huge part of being a media outlet. Even just me doing commentary, a big decision is just, what am I going to spend my limited commentary minutes talking about? And all of you know, I put a bunch of emphasis on the threat that Trump poses to democracy. Why? Because that is profoundly important. And every single outlet has to make these decisions. So when we see nonstop, as Jessica Tarlov said, breathless coverage of Biden's age, a new poll, oh my gosh, Biden, oh, panic, Biden, from outlets like the New York Times, it is indicative of an effort to prove, look, we can even do horrible coverage that's really hurting Biden, and we're not just in the Democratic Party's pocket. But if you just cared about being accurate and doing coverage that was reflective of the importance of different subjects, then you'd spend a little bit more time on the details of how Trump threatens democracy. You'd also, if you want to talk about Biden, include a couple things about his policy record, right? Is the only thing relevant about him his age? No. But if you ask most Americans, that's probably the only major detail they know about him. Truly, I've had a bunch of conversations, barely any information is getting to people about what Biden's actually been doing over the last few years, which is a pretty historic policy record. And so just trying to appear neutral is not the goal. You want to be objective. You want to be fact-based if you're doing objective journalism. And that's what a lot of these quote unquote liberal outlets get wrong. They're bending over backwards. Look, we're not too biased. And then actually exhibiting bias in the opposite direction than they're being accused of. Okay, with that being said, great to see Jessica Tarlov there debunking that idea. Now let's look at a couple RFK Jr. moments from recently. Here's the first.
You have gained notoriety for your skepticism about vaccines. And over the summer in an interview, you said, quote, "There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective." Do you still believe that?
I never said that.
So stop me. We have the clip. Please play the clip.
I
You've
just
talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine. Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective.
And by the way, while I was watching that, I was reflecting on the previous conversation. Another example of this that we've talked about in the past is we've compared headlines of the same economic metric being reported on under Trump, and it's Trump major, win, economy doing great from the same outlet. Then you go over same outlet under Biden, and it's a totally different tone, not hyped at all, not necessarily a win for Biden, how this could still hurt him politically, things like that. Or the coverage of the primaries, you saw Trump dominating these primaries, dominating, crushing, obliterating. And I guess Biden, still some concern in the Democratic Party over his nomination, despite him getting a larger percentage than Trump was getting. So what are we going to do? Here's another example from RFK Jr.
A number of your own family members have spoken out against it. 4 of your siblings issued a statement denouncing your candidacy, saying it's dangerous for the country. They wrote in a statement, "Bobby might share the same name as our father. He doesn't share the same values, vision, or judgment." Your family are icons of the Democratic Party. They do not typically speak out against their own, but they are in this case. Why?
Well, I have 105 family members, living family members.
But these are your
siblings. A lot of them are
siblings.
supporting me. But let me ask you this. Yeah. Does your family always agree with everything that you do?
They don't always agree with me, but I think they'd vote for me if I ran for president.
I mean, that is just painful to watch. And great response from the PBS host. She goes, "I think my family would vote for me for president." Now, you don't even have to say that your family would vote for you for president. It's just, would they engage in a years-long or months-long campaign to get someone else elected and say that you're threatening our democracy in your campaign? Probably not, is what I would say. I'll remind you, the vaccine thing is one of his biggest sort of issues that he talks about the most. But he's just been a conspiracy theorist on so many different things: antidepressants, transgenderism, AIDS, COVID, and then obviously his vaccine stances, or even censorship. Has a bunch of those sort of right-wing ideas about what has been done on that front. And he is not someone that exhibits rationality. And so that is very much shown in his vaccine views, but let us not think that that's just a one-off. He has it in a lot of different areas. And it's also important to note, as I've been saying a lot on the bonus show, lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, we've been talking about this a lot, he just doesn't have policy stances on a lot of things. He's so policy incoherent. I've watched interviews with him where he gets asked about all these subjects that are the big issues, like abortion, and he's just sort of spitballing. I said in a previous bonus show, it felt like you're watching a college freshman in Poli Sci 101. Oh, abortion, that's a big issue, isn't it? Well, maybe there could be like a line at one of the weeks. Or not a line, or no, okay, I don't think, well, actually, what, 15 weeks? Is that too early? 20? What? Oh, what's viability is a thing? Okay, it was very weird. He just does not have an understanding of his own policy views on a lot of things, or his spitballing about what would be good to do for the environment. And it was something like, I think we just need to let the free market address it. What? That's what's messed it up. RFK, my goodness. Now, separate from all of those things, the most important reason he should be spoken out against is because of headlines like this from New York Magazine. What the polls say today: RFK Jr. now hurting Biden, helping Trump. Now, I think it's important to say different polls have shown different things. And there's a chance RFK Jr. could pull more from Trump, but we just don't know. And if some polls are saying he could pull more voters from Biden, then him being present in this election is him participating in the threat against our democracy. That's what it is. If he helps Trump, then that is the outcome of his actions. And I'm not judging his intentions, but his outcome is a threat to democracy. And also, if he really cared about upholding our Constitution, our democracy, if he cared about just having a president who knows how to govern and get things done, cares about uplifting people in their communities, then he'd just support Joe Biden. He'd just be out there advocating for Joe Biden. I'm dead serious. That's what you do if you understand how the American electoral system works, and you go, oh, well, a Democrat or Republican is going to win. And the stakes in this election make it obvious that I need to advocate on behalf of the Democrat. Now, I won't get into the whole thing here because it would turn into a whole 10-minute rant, but it's not just that Joe Biden is not Trump, to be clear. And I talk about this a lot, but a lot of the media ignores it. He also has, again, this historic record of legislative victories just longer than we've seen in decades, and an economic recovery that stunned and outpaced comparable economies. Crime plummeting, pulling us out of that crisis. And again, things like the American Rescue Plan, Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Law, the PACT Act, the Chips and Science Act, the marriage equality being enshrined into law. These things matter. And so vote for him too, not just against Donald Trump. But I won't get to that again. Here's a little focus group that made me very sad.
They're both way too old to be there.
One's too childish, one's too senile.
What do you all need to hear to pick a candidate?
Michelle Obama come in.
I need a new
Can she
candidate.
slide in?
Yes.
I really do.
Maybe Kennedy being a stronger
Yeah.
opponent.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with actually both of you.
Yeah. We need somebody new to come in and shake things up.
Randy, those women sound really disappointed in their choices. Did they say what their vote will ultimately come down to?
Well, Anderson, at least two of the women told us, in fact, they may not vote at all, but they are all really disappointed, as you said, in their choices in Trump and Biden. But on the flip side of that, they're also all very intrigued by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is running as an independent. In fact, one woman who really strongly dislikes Donald Trump told me that if Trump were to choose Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his running mate, she would vote for Trump. But really, Anderson, I get a sense from these women that they're not looking to hear something specific from Biden or Trump to win their vote. What they're looking for is a new candidate, a fresh face who they believe will bring real change. Anderson?
Have you heard anything about him though? I feel like people just know the name. There's other things about him that you should know before you say that. I promise that a 20-minute conversation with the women in this focus group, and most likely they would have their views changed if I could just walk through how Trump threatens democracy, Biden's record, things you care about. Let me compare and contrast what it is that Biden stands for, RFK Jr. stands for, and Trump stands for. It's not just the social media clips of a gaffe here and there. It's not. That's not the only thing that matters. Please. Actually, it probably matters the least in all the different things that we talk about on a daily basis with Joe Biden. He has all these things he's been doing that impact your life way more, just so much more. It's hard to even fathom. And so those should get a little bit of your attention too. And the survival of our democracy should get a little bit of your attention too in our Constitution, not just the viral social media clips or the concerns around his age. And I get that's real. I'm not trying to invalidate one's feeling about his age, but there are other things too that I think people are just missing. And it's because of salacious things getting a lot more attention and just the way that these conversations go, it's easier to linger on that one when other things really matter and people's lives are at stake here, their well-being, I should say. It's at stake in this election. And we need to take it seriously and make sure to inform yourself on who RFK Jr. is before floating him as a nice alternative. And I know that for a lot of people, it's satisfying to sort of be above the fray, right? I'm not a part of that divided, two-sided thing. And I'm not a part of the division that I feel in this country because I'm picking a third option, or I think both sides are equally condemnable. So I'm not really offending anyone. But there's nothing admirable in a moment where the stakes are what they are about splitting the difference between right and wrong, right? And think about historical moments. So often there was a correct option. And it wasn't, gosh, I wish we could have split the difference between blank and blank. I don't want to reference actual examples because people constantly go, were you really comparing this current moment to the blah, blah, blah time? So instead, you can think of those historical events in your own time, in your own head. But we often look at history and go, there was a correct choice, a correct direction, and an incorrect one that a different side was advocating for. And then on both sides, you have extremists, but Biden happens to represent the rational, reasonable part of his side, and Donald Trump represents the irrational, unreasonable part of his side. And so in that sort of context, you just go 100% for one of them and not split the difference between right and wrong. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel.